a great honor for me to be introducing Dan Taft, who will be the first speaker tonight. He has been a good friend of Canadian athletics, having coached a number of top Canadian athletes, including Donovan Bailey, who has the world record in 100 meters, Bruce Stern, and Mark Boswell, who we all know quite well. It's really nice for the Canadian Athletics Coaching Center to be able to have this kind of talent available for the next 4 days. So I hope you enjoy the presentation.
When I asked Kevin what was appropriate for tonight, he suggested a training theory type based lecture, and we'll leave this pretty loose. This is pretty open-ended, small group. So if you have questions or concerns or huge disagreements and you want us to pause a little bit and address those, please feel free to do that. I'm pretty used to a lot of interruptions and a lot of disagreements. And please don't take any of this as gospel or seminal information. This is just an evolution of a system that we use, where I'm currently at in Florida. It's been influenced by some tremendous mentors that I've had. Tom Tellez was probably my greatest mentor. Coach Carl Lewis and Burrell, and Floyd and Hurd, and on and on and on. And Victor Lopez, who just retired at Rice, he's a technical delegate for the IAAF. And he studied with Vittori and Calvasi. So, these generations just keep producing. Gary Winkler at Illinois, Vern Gambetta, people like that. And then studying Russian, DDR systems, the Canadian system, MACH, and Japanese systems. So it's a pretty eclectic approach, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and put it together in a system that works pretty good with North American athletes and the sociology that we fight in North America. I've been blessed. I coach and consult in a lot of areas, not just track and field or sprinting. My early work was primarily as a field event coach, jumpers and throwers and multi-eventers. But I've been able to work with NFL players and NBA players and PGA golfers and even bobsleigh here and there, downhill skiing. And it's been kind of a neat journey because you really find common denominators when you're working in power speed. And tonight's lecture is kind of geared a little bit more towards power speed athletes. And I use the word field in here pretty loosely, athletes that are in the arena or in the field, if you will. I think one of the things that came to me very early, that there is a great deal of science that's involved in training theory and periodizational models and designing programs and whatnot. But what I learned from Victor Lopez was there's also a pedagogical art form. And I think one of my gifts is I have the ability to see athletes and see needs and construct pedagogical schemes that are compatible to their mindset and the way they operate. For those of you that have had the pleasure or the unpleasure of being around Bruni Surin or Donovan Bailey or Mark Boswell at times, these are very unique personalities with unique demands. And I have friends in the coaching business that probably couldn't have juggled those three personalities simultaneously. Not that I did a great job, but I think by looking at common denominators and commonalities, I was able to construct programs where those guys could coexist and actually train side by side. A lot of people don't realize Mark Boswell, he was the fastest high jumper ever biomechanically recorded coming into the bar. He would do block starts with these guys 10, 20, 30 meters and be right with them at 30. It frustrated him that he couldn't be with them at 70 because, it was a dream of his to run 10-0 one day, but that never happened. Of course, Jerry Ramagita can probably tell you why that didn't happen. Jerry's his physio. So the training process for developing young field athletes is a complex blending of logical, biological, physiological, biomechanical, and educational or pedagogical principles. And I'm a little bit more of a biomechanist, and in the physiology realm, I look at it more from a neurochemical standpoint. And again, don't take this as gospel type stuff. This is the way I look at it. So foundationally, I look for biomechanical efficiency or improvement first in any task, whether it be general or specific, in any of the biomotor abilities. And then secondly, the grid that I use is what's going on with the neurochemistry. How is it being affected? How is it being enhanced, developed, promoted? Or sometimes you get negative flows. You know, where's the drain coming from? The scientific knowledge realms, I'm blessed. I have so many athletes that are in medicine and research and whatnot, and I'd get files sent to me. I got stacks for days in my office. Steve was in my office. My desk, it looks like a bomb went off. And somebody said that the amount of scientific information doubles every month in a particular finite area. So I think it behooves us to stay concurrent, but at the same time, you know, we have to see the forest through the trees. And I think the blending of these principles outlined here are very, very important. I've made mistakes where I've gotten too scientific with people or certain schematics or certain training years and became a slave to science. And I've had other years where probably been a little bit too lenient in the pedagogical realm. Assuming people knew things or assuming that those things that I thought were learned were in fact learned. And I think that one of the things I realized there has to be consistent litmus test on all these principles that we just outlined here. I don't think there's a concrete blueprint for any of these event areas that we're discussing. There's an old coach, football coach, and Bobby Bowden down at Florida State, and his philosophy is, you know, if you give me your 90 and you take my 90, I'm still going to beat you. And I think that's true with a lot of schemes. I've seen some guys that have, you know, beautiful schemes that I'd feel very comfortable with. There's others that have schemes that it would take me a while to figure it out, but these schemes are successful for a reason. Mr. Bondarchuk's going to talk tonight. And some of his schemes are very, very far removed from what we understand in classical training theory or what the research has or what the great writers have written about it. So I think there's many roads to Rome. And I'd like to stand up here and tell you that, you know, how I trained Obadiah Thompson was very similar to Donovan Bailey, which was very similar to Bruni Surin. But you have three very unique 100-meter sprinters there, two that run 9.84 and one that ran 9.86. Oba's 5'9", allergic to steel, never steps a foot in the weight room. As a result, has tremendous joint injuries and chronic injury patterns. Donovan was kind of tall, very elastic, very long femur, great lever system, incredible warrior instincts and risk-taking capabilities. Bruni was a little bit more cerebral, very muscled, extremely powerful. So all three of these guys run in the same neighborhood but had very, very unique training schematics when it came down to specifics. Now, there were some common denominators and commonalities, which we'll discuss in a second, but what I'm trying to get across here is, you know, one size doesn't fit all, and, you know, sometimes we get caught in our paradigm of teaching or our paradigm of writing training schedules, and we try to force athletes into those paradigms instead of sometimes looking at the big picture and how they're reacting to this scheme that we have written and what's transpiring therein. The goal for me is to just turn some lights on or get people thinking a little bit differently tonight. Or maybe it's reconfirmation. What you're doing is, in fact, really good. Not that I'm correct or anything, but there's some common factors, some common agreements on training theory or training prescription. One of the things that I'd like to allude to here is the word prescription. We were discussing at dinner last night the number of times I've ever had an athlete go into a major championship tapered or peaked. And I'm not so sure how this peaking stuff works anyway. I've never had that moment or that epiphany where I've said, hey, they peaked and the performance went off. Not even Donovan's run in Atlanta, because 10 days before it, he tore all three adductors and couldn't walk. So what we did in those 10 days before his first round, I wouldn't call classic training theory. 7 days on a bicycle, 24-hour acupuncture, therapy around the clock. It was pretty insane. He touched the ground, I about 30 hours before his first round. That's not classic training theory. So I think prescription and getting better at prescription is a valuable tool. You know, the prescription, of course, is based on your training theory and your schemes as you've written through the year and the months, the weeks, and the day. But sometimes you have to drop to plan B and plan C. And as Les knows, sometimes we've sat on the fence and we're on plan D and they haven't fired the gun yet. So I think we have to be flexible. We have to know the pedagogy and the science and the art. But, you know, we have to be in a prescriptive motif, especially around championship time. I see a lot of coaches, you know, they get into fear mode or worry mode 3 to 4 weeks out. And, you know, I still get nerves 3 to 4 weeks out. But having been on the bus 32 years, you know, I understand that this too shall pass. And I see a lot of coaches that are so enamored with their work and their program and their scheme that they're going to force that athlete into that scheme those last 10 days or last 2 weeks because that's the only thing that they've got to hang on to. You know, when they're fighting all of this chaos that goes through your mind under the pressures of a World Championships or Olympic Games or Commonwealth Games. So bear in mind as we go through this, you know, I may drift off into prescriptive discussion, and it may not be landmark dogmatic, you know, in the classical training theory context. All right, the core of any training plan, you know, you're trying to improve readiness, functional state, capacity, so on and so forth. And in most training theories, we branch out and discuss biomotor abilities. Frank Dick and Brent McFarland had the 5 S's, borrowed generously from Dietrich Hari. But by and large, with any power speed athlete that we're training physiological factors that deal with speed, strength, skill, and skill would include technique, form, suppleness, which would include mobility and flexibility, and stamina, or endurance or work capacity. For power speed, that last item, I like work capacity as a better frame than endurance or stamina. You know, a world-class thrower has to be able to get up to a capacity where they can do 10 to 12 sets of Olympic lifts of singles and doubles, 6 days a week, for example, or at least 3 hits a week. So they need a work capacity. They need to develop the ATP PC system, the alactic system, the enzymatic routings that'll support that kind of work. And when I started writing Olympic lifting programs for jumpers and sprinters many years ago, most of my athletes thought I'd lost my mind. It was like 12 sets of 2 because they're used to the 4x4, you know, the old basic stuff. And I said, well, wait a minute. Olympic lifters, yeah, a lot of them are on gas, but they lift 3 times a day, 10 to 12 sets a session, 6-7 days a week, 48 weeks out of the year, and they hold up. And they don't gain weight because they stay in the same weight class. Well, how do they do that? Well, they do singles and doubles, and they have different restorative measures and so on and so forth. So if they can do 30, 40 sets a day, and I'm asking you to do 10 or 12, that's not such a reach. Well, luckily, I had a lot of guys that just said, well, that sounds logical, and they bought in. And as a result, we get a lot of work done on certain neurochemical pathways and batteries and enzymatic constructs in the weight room without the pounding of sprinting or jumping. Now, we need a work capacity of jumping. Like world-class high jumpers like a Mark Boswell, he has to have the ability to take 20 really good jumps in a 3-day period at a World Championships and Olympic Games. There's qualifying rounds. You'd love to go through them without a miss, but Mr. Boswell always liked to give Alec gray hair, or some hair, gray. And Mark had a knack for missing 2 or 3 times through the qualifying round. So if you add it all up, you know, there were a lot of big meets where he had 20 jumps. So he had to have the capacity to take 20 jumps, amped up in front of 80,000 people at a very high level. So what I'm alluding to here, a lot of times we get caught in the aerobic world or this idea of building a base before we train. And my question is, a base of what? I think a base of work-specific task, yes. A general aerobic base, in my paradigm, no. Even though I'm going to get a very general aerobic base doing these tasks. Interesting research out this year of short intensive bouts of exercise. It was a study, 30-second all-out, very intensive works on bicycle ergometers, 4-minute rest, 6 repetitions, 6-week study. When they looked at the mitochondrial enzyme markers, a greater aerobic increase in these subjects than any study, and the guy reviewed 200 different aerobic indice studies, than any of these other studies obtained in a year, longitudinal studies. So that was great validation for me, because anecdotally, I'd have girls, throwers come in, 250, 260, poor self-image, body fat just laying all over the place, and just doing our power speed schemes, within a couple years down to 205. They'd get some confidence. They might take a jogging class. I had one girl that was 305 when I got there. When she graduated 4 years later, she weighed 205 and scored in the 88th percentile on a Cooper's test her senior year in a jogging class. And we didn't jog anything. She didn't do any road work, any step aerobics, any pool workouts or anything. So I knew that we were getting aerobic function, mitochondrial enzymatic function, through different routes. And as I said earlier, the science is very important, because sometimes we get caught in paradigms where we're armed with a little bit of science and we're trying to juggle too many balls. And I know that in working with NFL players, it's barbaric, some of the running workouts that their strength coaches have these guys go through the summer and the off season, because they're trying to increase aerobic indices and anaerobic capacities and thresholds. But, 325-pound nose guards, if it's a long play, they might run 25 yards. For them to run repeat 200 meters and 400-meter breakdowns and all this, and these guys are $5 million players, to put a person through that is insanity to me, but it is the norm in professional football in the States. I've had a few guys where, they through injuries or whatnot, their trainers, their strength coaches just gave up, said this guy's out of the league or whatnot. I'd bring them back from death, and they'd play the 16-game season in the playoffs and probably have one of their best years, because they were training more scientifically, more systematic to their actual event task, and they developed the endurance and the work capacity through doing event-specific work that fed these biochemical systems, these biophysical demands. So I caution, in the biomotor ability of endurance or stamina, that in my paradigm anyway, I'm more into work capacity, developing a capacity to endure and survive specific tasks. At the university where I teach, I have about 28 different subcategories of speed that I measure and test for periodically. Brings up a concept of testing. I used to test, I'd have different cycles, and I'd test in the off week or the recovery week, because the other 3 weeks I had all this golden stuff that had to get done. So I thought, well, it's a recovery week, we'll test. Well, I really didn't understand neurophysiology or biochemistry real well when I came up with that idea, because what happens when you go to a recovery week and the body senses that volume or intensity or density has dropped? It gears down. And so I'm testing these guys in a disadvantaged state biochemically, and I'm getting results that are inferior to results I was getting during the cycle in heavy work. And I was like, wow, this probably isn't a good idea to do a lot of test batteries on recovery weeks or recovery days. And so then I got this smart idea, well, I'll do it early in the cycle. Well, then I started realizing once we got back to work, it took 3 or 4 days for the chemistry to figure out, hey, we're back to work, and the computer to reboot and all these systems get up running. So if I tested one of the first few days, that was probably as bad as testing in the rest of the week because the chemistry was just starting to climb. And so I'd get weird performances like excel in certain power indices, fail in strength indices, mediocre in speed indices. And I was like, well, okay, this testing on the rest week doesn't work. This testing early in the cycle doesn't work. So then just being a country guy with a little bit of common sense, I said, well, I guess I'm just going to test during the training cycle and, create little sub-tests in the training schemes. And I started getting more reliable data. The validity was a lot better. And then, I had some kids that didn't test real well. We all have people that don't always test well when they hear that it's a test. Like we call them practice All-Americans in the state. Guy that's in practice looks like he could beat the world. He's doing workouts that says he can beat the world. You go to the meet, you do your pre-meet workout. Again, he's still looking like he's ready to break every record on the book. And then the gun comes out or the tape measure comes out, and they look like they haven't been to a middle school championship. So you have to develop pedagogical schemes for them to overcome the fear of testing. And so I got into this idea, not only was I testing within the cycle, but I was testing without them knowing I was testing them. And sometimes that's a tool or a stepping stone into teaching people to take tests, physiological tests, trying to ascertain where these biomotor qualities are so that you can analyze what you think you've gotten done in the last cycle and to predict what you may need to work on in the oncoming cycles, or to make decisions whether you should stabilize that next cycle and not go on and add additional stimuli. So some of the things in speed, we don't have time, or I don't think you had the patience to listen to all 28. So I wrote down a couple of the key ones. And again, trying to stay in a general sense, I tried to give a smattering of all. The first thing in speed that we spend a lot of time doing, whether they're downhill skiers or football players or track and field athletes, jumpers, sprinters, multi-eventers, I even use this with 10,000 meter runners, is acceleration runs. And through our testing runs, up through about 30 meters is pretty tolerable. And again, sliding in this work capacity, when Bruni and Donovan, guys like that, world-class sprinters, are really in a heavy work cycle and they're pretty keen and the trainers are there and we're getting good therapy, they can do 18 to 21 block starts. So they develop a work capacity for that. And world-class sprinters need that capacity. And Donovan was always a challenge. He always wanted to know why. He says, if I'm in a race, there might be 2 false starts and then a start. And he goes, so that's 3 starts. So why am I doing 18 starts? And so I had to break it down. I said, okay, when you're at the warm-up track before you go in the big stadium, are you pretty amped? He said, yeah, I'm getting ready to fight. So already the adrenaline level's up. All right, so if the adrenaline level's up, the effort's going to be a little more jazzed up than it was in Austin, Texas, 110 degrees with nobody around, just going through a work week. But we usually do somewhere between 2 to 4 pretty hard accels in spikes, sometimes out of blocks, sometimes rolling, sometimes falling start, whatever the therapist needed to see to do the last minute stuff, and for me to see game planning, how he's firing that day, and so on and so forth. Then you go into the stadium, and everybody sets their blocks and does a pop out or 2. So let's say they do 2. They may only pop out 10 meters, but they're banging it to making sure the blocks hold and that they've got it up. And then let's say there's 2 false starts, so they go on the 3rd. Well, if you add this up, if you go 4, 2, and 3, correct me, that's 9 starts, right? Well, guess what? There's 4 rounds in 2 days. All right? So in the second round, 5 hours later, coming back, they do 9. Well, if you add those up, it's 18, right? So that's kind of why we do 18. in a given day. And sometimes we'd come back second day and do speed runs out of blocks and have commensurate, to set up for that second day fallout biochemically. So that's what I mean by work capacity. Now, doing road work or anaerobic capacity runs or anything is not going to build that biochemistry. It's not going to enhance the biophysical stress that these tissues undergo doing that kind of work. So it has to be very specific work and very specific capacities. Now, with multi-directional sport athlete, our acceleration runs are done in a multitude of directions. So we might do lateral work like side shuffles or crossovers or cariokas at different body heights, at different velocities on different type surfaces. We have series where we do backward walks correctly, heel to the butt, then extension, designed for some self-therapy, for therapists to analyze things, and also to work the posterior chain and work that axis in that direction. So we have backward walks, backward skips, backward runs. One of the things early in the business that amazed me is I went in when I was at LSU and studied sports med records, and it's a strange quirk I have. And I noticed that on that campus, the people that had the fewest hamstring irritations or strains were defensive backs and basketball players. We had all these sports, and they had the lowest incidence. And I started thinking, well, what do these people do ergonomically all day long? They work backwards. So that's why I plugged some of that in. And, by the grace of God, a lot of my guys, we've dodged a lot of serious hamstring situations. I credit to that kind of work. So our acceleration runs are in a multitude of environments, sometimes uphill. Some people use sleds or resistance. I think you have to be careful with sleds that it doesn't alter the biomechanics of the ground contact time or the flight time. Guys take it to the nth degree. The football guys, can I use a sled? Yeah, okay. And then you fly out and see what they're doing. They're dragging a sled with four weight plates on it, bent over, just digging, staying on the ground 10 hours, wondering why their acceleration results are going down instead of up. Well, you get into stereotypes, and if you get into a stereotype that you're dragging, 200-pound loads, you're not going to be a very efficient sprinter neuromuscularly when you take that sled off and try to run, because you're going to be trapped in certain stereotypical ground flight dynamics. All right, maximum speed runs. For young kids, they're going to be hitting max speed around 30 meters. Some world-class guys, depending on how they feather it out, somewhere around 70 to 80 meters. Kaba, you here?
Yeah.
On a Safa's run, where did he top? Do you remember?
I think 70.
70?
70.
Yeah, so a lot of these guys are feathering it out. They're looking at energy distributions and transition patterns and whatnot. Back in the day, like Bob Hayes, he was like red line at 32 meters, I think. Alec, help me here, 33? Come on. You used to dig holes in the cinders, and like Jesse Owen. All right, and in maximum speed runs, one of the things that we found to increase overall speed qualities, these runs had to be done at a minimum of 88% of their max velocity. Better results around 92. Every once in a while, good weather, nice tailwind or something, we'd get super results where they'd run faster than they've ever run. In terms of volume, going back to acceleration development type stuff, a big workload for us would be 400 or 500 meters. And in speed, a big workload would be 400 to 500 meters. Now, I know the Italians and some of the Russians and a little bit of the DDR, they have these big numbers, but, in my event training group, like Bruni could do about 4 times 60 meters. And after that, he just blew up. I don't care what time of the year it was. His just body structure, chemistry, 4. Donovan could hit 6. O was a weird bird. He's gone 8 a couple times with just increasing speeds or stabilized speeds. But I think absolute speed runs, I think the number is a little lower than what the literature says in my experience. But that could be influenced by how we train. What's preceding the day's workout or 2 days workout, or what's following. And sometimes you have to be careful when you're looking at training theory or studying training systems from other people, is the compatible complementary issues not only within the day but within the week, and the density issues. How many times that week are you hitting certain qualities? Our density of acceleration development is twice a week, pretty far apart, and we do it 46 to 48 weeks out of the year. I think acceleration is a skill, a very complex neuromuscular skill, and because it's a skill, it has to be hit at a minimum twice a week, and it has to be hit all year long. And that flies in the face of a lot of systems because people are afraid of injuries, or they're old school with get the base first. But acceleration is a skill. And so if you have athletes that are moving and where speed is important in a horizontal plane, I think that some research or some experimentation is called for there, because in our experience and our data and some of the guys that I collaborate with and network with, that's what we find. Speed, on the other hand, I've never loaded it more than 30-some weeks in a training year. It's usually a little bit further down the road. And there is a phenomena called chronic load syndrome. And what we find is if you spend too many sessions in speed, or they're too frequent, it's kind of like white noise. The athlete stops progressing. And discoordination or a drop in performance is evident. So I caution you to study this phenomenon of chronic load syndrome. Speed endurance, this is kind of special speed endurance. We do runs 80 to 150 meters. And then after this subsection, then you get into like lactate thresholds and lactate capacities and whatnot. I think most of the research that we find physiologically is a lot of energy system stuff. And the one thing that I had a wake-up call is a lot of times I thought these things, they kind of changed channels. It was this and then this. I didn't realize these things were all going on simultaneously, and that these switches happen at different at places. Some of these guys with tremendous work capacity, there really isn't an alactic marker until 8 or 9 seconds in some of these guys, where in an untrained novice you might see it at 4 to 6 seconds. So training age, maturational age, chronological age will have influence on this, but so will training work capacities in those functional areas. So when I talk about speed endurance, I'm talking primarily jumpers and sprinters and footballers, rugby players, things like that. And those are runs there. I've had a few defensive linemen go up to about 90 meters. And what I found after that is their running mechanics deteriorated so badly that you had to question whether you were actually getting anything out of it. And what I found is if they needed to endure a little bit longer than that we switched and did unique bicycle workouts to take the pounding off the joint system. Because footballers and rugby players have tremendous joint issues because it's the price they pay to play the game that they love. All right, along with that, light implement work, heavy implement work. This is drifting a little bit more maybe towards the throwing events. There's all kinds of schemes. I guess you guys will talk light and heavy tonight, so I won't step on that. But with our jumpers and throwers and multi-eventers and even middle distance runners, I know, Stu, you guys do some of the multiple throw stuff. With bobslayers and I have skiers and even some of the PGA guys I've had that are trying to get more driving distance and more power into their game. We do a lot of multiple throwing. Throws like overhead back, between the leg forward, twisting throws, single-legged throws, stabilization throws, where we're throwing for distance. We're trying to increase power output, and using light and heavy implements and normal weight implements at different times of the year is a good way to train neuromuscular pathways. What we found is if we do that kind of activity after a heavy acceleration or speed day, it actually reboots the computer so that when we go into the weight room, we're still synchronized. There's a lot of discoordination after those running type workouts. And what we found is, you've always got some athletes that hide when you do stuff that they don't see the relevance to. So Donovan was pretty famous of dodging the multiple throws, and he'd struggle for 4 or 5 sets in the Olympic lifts because he was all over the place from the running workout, where Bruni, Oba, Kareem, some of those guys would do it, and they were hitting those Olympic lifts right from the get-go. And so through the school of hard knocks, and empirical evidence, we feel pretty strongly that there's a tuning effect out of these criteria. It's interesting, though, I spent 11 years at LSU, and when we got there wasn't much of a program. And in a matter of short time, we had the women's program and the men's program winning national titles every year. And we did a longitudinal study on overhead back and between the leg forward throws with the women. And we used a 4K shot for them. And during that 11-year time period, we had 29 girls that have broke 1150. And any girl that was between 1120 and 1150 had 14-meter 50 overhead backs at the minimum, and almost the same 14 meters 50, 1430 between the leg forward. Now the overhead back is more gluteal spine recruitment chain, where the between the leg forward is more like starting block. It's more hip extensor, quadricep chain. But it was interesting that any girl in that block, boom, it was there. It was of all of our lifts and activities, running workouts, that was the 2 highest correlates we had to performance. And then I think we had 18 girls that were between 1120 and 11 flat. And every one of those were 15 meters or better. We had 4 or 5 other girls that were between 1090 and 11 flat. And they were 16 meters. And then we had 2 girls that were in the 1078 club and 1082 club. And they were 17 meters. And then carrying that over to the men's side, Donovan, untrained, his first month of training with me, overhead back 18 meters. And he wasn't a gifted athlete. I mean, he was very discoordinated once he got off the basketball court or the lane that he was running in. Bruni, 1790. Kareem Street Thompson, a 995 guy, 1790. So is it how we train or how we implement or whatever? The bottom line is, in those tests with those the guys use 726, those values remain true. All right. Other activities for speed? Yes. Yeah.
Let's just say, when you're starting a cycle, right, you're doing like maximum strength, you're getting new stuff, putting up you're aiming strength. So you're doing lots of lifting sets, like you said, 8 or 9 sets. Would you work when you're doing some multi throws, like for stabilization or for distance power, right? Would you do more of because I think, would you do more of a heavy type situation there with the ball as far as the weight of the ball, of the med ball or the shot or whatever you're throwing, or would you do lighter during max strength clean week in the beginning of the cycle?
Okay, it would depend, for me, on time of the year.
Okay.
In the classic general prep or early preseason or something, and then I would preface it by the athlete and their skill level and all of that. Generally, I would go to normal heavy in that block. If there was a skill mastery issue, then I would go medium to medium light so that they could get more reps, or you could do more teaching. It gets so heavy that they get into just bailout mechanics. If I know that athlete has a speed strength issue, that they get tremendously strong but they're not wired real good, then I'm going to stay light because I got to feed that dragon somehow. Yeah.
So you would say in a load situation in that maximal strength league, you tend to go normal to heavier in the beginning and then kind of tear downward as the weight.
If the athlete is a middle of the road to excel and they're handling all of that, yes. But again, I get a lot of these guys that can, in the throws, for example, that can lift the weight room. Whether it's Olympic lifts or static lifts, but they their speed of transmission isn't real good. So we'd go light a lot of the year with those guys, trying to balance our work there with some neural stim. Good question. All right, some other ancillary type stuff there is speed bag, jump ropes, multiple jumps with approach. Some of the batteries we use with multiple jumping, like standing long jump, standing triple, double-legged bounds, hurdle hopping, things like that. Well, if you can do it, you can train a lot of things. If you come at complete rest, like on a multiple throw, total stop and explode, then you're working starting strength or inertial strength. Where if you rebound, if you have a counter movement to it, you're working more of an elastic. And what we found is, kids that are poor starters, don't have good power output or transmission, even though they're set up pretty good, their starting strength levels are usually terrible. So a lot of times we'll do these multiple jumps or these multiple throws from a static start to improve that overcoming inertia quality. Where if you wanted speed quality, you could create a walk-in or a jog-in. So if you're going to hop 5 hurdles and you start at a total dead stop and you hop over it and you freeze, you land in a good position, and you stop the next, you're doing repetitive inertial start training. Where if you rebound, you're doing, classic elastic training. But if you wanted elastic speed training, then a jog-in or a walk-in before you did those bounds would increase the neuromuscular and elastic demands of the activity. So again, a lot of these activities are common denominators, and it's how you set up the initiation of it as to what it's really training. Hopefully what you're seeing here is there's all kinds of routings to be creative, but at the end of the day, it's falling into some of these gross motor schematics. In the United States, 30 years ago, there might be an assistant football coach that really couldn't coach, and so they gave him weight room duties. But now, there's entire strength staffs. At the University of Florida, we have 8 full-time guys. The director is an associate AD in charge of strength and conditioning. It's an industry. And these guys are all about, big and guns. For TV, you got to look good, have the big guns. You'll actually see strength coaches in there pumping up on game day because, they're going to be on the sidelines with the shirts. And, boy, there's some very unique caveman approaches in there. They've taken neurophysiology back to the bubonic plague era. So, we're going to get away from that a little bit. When I look at strength training with power speed athletes, first thing is work capacity in a general sense, in general strength. So we're talking hypertrophy type lifts, joint isolation lifts where you're working tendon, ligamentous, fascial trains, different circuit training, stage training, all the classic stuff. And the goal there is to increase joint stability, joint function, fascial communication, balancing fascial trains, long anatomy trains, developing glycogen stores, mitochondrial enzymatic function, things of that nature. Absolute and relative strength training. Absolute, by my terminology there is, what can you lift? What's the absolute on a particular lift? And relative would be, okay, you lift X for your body weight or your event group, how is that? What I've found with power speed athletes, both male and female, in the sprints, jumps, and multi-events, if I can keep their bench and their power clean about equal, we're pretty good. If they get a little bit off, like if the bench is winning, then they have a tendency to be upper body driven in their motor task. If the legs win, then there's usually some upper body discoordination in tasks. Like in sprinting, a lot of times you'll see sprinters do a lot of leg work. Sprinting is strength training, acceleration development. They have great legs, but their arms are terrible, and their arms create injury patterns or motor dysfunction, or they're the limiting factor on why they're not running faster. I'm a big believer in coaching arm movement. I think that bang for the buck, I've corrected more sprinting problems by educating people how to use their arms correctly during a sprint cycle than anything biomechanically I've ever done. So those are examples in that area, and how we attack those through lifting, multiple throws, multiple jumps. Again, we'll attack those areas. Static and dynamic type strengths, delves into postural strength, strength shortening exercises, isometrics. And I'm kind of old school. We create isometric moments in our lifts. The address at the bar, just as they go to start, there's a tremendous isometric firing indice there. And I'm one of those weird guys. I make my guys do negative work on Olympic lifts and put it down. And just as they go to put it on the floor and lay it down gently, there's another chance to work this isometric. Why? Because there's moments where there's isometric activity, in the quote EMG sense. And if an athlete isn't trained to withstand those isometric forces, that could be the weak link in the chain or where the injury problem happens. How many times have you seen a guy come out of the blocks, their projection angle's too low, and they have to step lateral to catch themselves? Well, there's a tremendous isometric moment on those adductors. And if those adductors haven't been trained to withstand certain isometric forces, it's a pretty good chance you're going to have an adductor chain injury from that. I think that, we see in the States a ton of anterior cruciate ruptures, posterior cruciate ruptures in female athletes, especially volleyball, basketball, and gymnastics. And some of that is they're too planar. They just work in the forward plane. They don't do enough lateral and posterior chain work. But in a lot of cases when we do testing, contralateral, ipsilateral, or any combination thereof, these girls fail miserably on isometric tests. Tremendously deficient. They may have power test ratings that are off the chart, absolute strength, that are off the chart and all that. The only big hickey that we see is in isometric moments. And we find this in therapy too. A lot of people will have nice muscle testing through end range, through MOB, but they'll hit a spot and you test that spot and there's nothing there. It just goes. And I think I don't understand the biochemistry completely on what goes on in an isometric exercise, but I do think there's unique pathways that are recruited during that moment. So we do spend a little bit of time on that. An example on benching or squatting is a static dynamic bench, where you come down, complete pause, 3 to 5 seconds. And then you overcome inertia to come up. There's a tremendous isometric moment there on that interface. And so we get not only purely a concentric volitional force, by doing that, but we also get isometric training in the same bailiwick. So I try to design movement tasks that hit a lot of things because I'm kind of a universalist. A lot of people isolate and do all this, but when they run down the track, all these systems and all these training, it's all involved in one movement. So they got to integrate it sometime. So I think the more I integrate it in different realms, the more likely they are to integrate it in a full line of motion. Yes?
Would you say that you integrate it throughout the year when you're doing, like when you said, use the bench example, when you're stopping, would you do the next set, or would you just continue?
Yeah, I mean, we'll get up to 10 sets of 5.
Right. So you go back.
Yeah, and then, I may have generally if a person is a poor starter, like they just don't have the bang. Or you have a thrower and they get a little bit off balance and they come to almost a stop and they got to restart to hit it. Those restarting moments. People that are struggling with that capacity to get going again. I'll have that plugged in all year long. Not that it's all week long or whatever, but I'm going to have sessions where that's in there because I think that we have to train to overcome, that quality. And it's truly overcoming inertia. All right, eccentric lifting and multiple jumps are ways we attack that. Power lifting, multiple jumps, multiple throws. Sprinting, yes. Throwing. I was blessed. I had a young man that threw, I got to think metric now, 64.90 when he was 19 years old in the disc. And a lot of back problems. And wish I knew then what I know now in terms of therapy and whatnot. But at 19, just paralyzing back problems, and went in and did x-rays and all that, and he had an extra vertebrae in his lumbar. And so it created a unique spinal situation that caused the pelvis to go into anteversion. Well, if you get real strong and this gets drawn, the iliopsoas iliacus gets strong. You know how throwers kind of get strong like that. It just increased, and then the foramen reduced more and more as the anteversion grew greater, and so he'd get sciatica, drop foot, it's pretty serious. So, not being a real wizard, I was like, well, we probably shouldn't lift, which was a good call. And so this guy, the next 2 years of his career, never lifted. I mean, he just couldn't lift. And still threw 64, 65 meters, every year with he could do multiple jumps, he could do multiple throws, and he could throw. And so, it drove home to me that throwing is a tremendous way to get strong and get powerful and undergo eccentric and amortization principles and all this. Throwing. When I was at Houston in 1980, when I started at Houston with Coach Tellez, Carl Lewis was a first-year student there. And Carl was a lot like Oba. He was allergic to steel also. Carl never lifted until he was about 36. And I would see, just the change in structure, and sometimes in the females too, just through sprinting, because one of the things that people don't realize, if you're doing acceleration development, say you take our workout where we did 6 sets of 3 out of the blocks. We might do a set of 10, then a set of 20, then a set of 30, then come back and 10, go that way. We've used portable lactate analyzers, and Bruni Cern had a lactate value of 16.8 millimoles after that workout. Donovan Bailey, 15.2. Oba, 14 something. Kareem was real high, like 17. Well, world-class 400-meter runner or 800-meter runner at the end of the race, correct me if I'm wrong, 10, 12 millimoles. So by running 30 meters, we were creating more lactate in a different routing, because sprinters need to learn how to spike, recover, spike, instead of get up here and endure. But then doing research, I kind of figured out that lactate's pretty anabolic. And so through sprinting, you create an anabolic environment, through this lactate process, if it's well designed and it's integrated, through the training cycle. And so I think that you can get tremendous strength training, power training, just sprinting. I mean, Coach Tellez was very, very successful with a multitude of guys that didn't lift. I'm not a proponent of that. I mean, I'm a big lifter, but when you get an Obadale Thompson and he just refuses to lift, then you got to find other pathways. All right, we'll go a little bit more and then we'll take a break. Coordination. Yeah, Derek.
Out of curiosity, do you think that Oba could have run faster had he wanted to lift?
Personally, yes. I mean, you got to be careful. Sometimes it may have killed what was great. But Oba had a history from 14 years old on of a tremendous performance. Injury was a result of that performance, down for weeks or months on end. Tremendous performance. Reboot the computer from 14 on. And I think he was so gifted with limb velocities that the joints just could not withstand the forces. When we came into 2001, he had the 6 weeks of training that were off the charts, better than anything Bruni or Donovan. If you'd asked me, I said, Oba's ready to go 980, 982. The day before we leave to come up here, coming out of the blocks, he tears a pec, complete rupture. Well, tremendous forces. I've had guys dislocate shoulders coming out of the blocks. There's huge forces there. No kind of strength training, to protect and ensure that joint. So yeah, I believe a lot of his chronic SI stuff, again, if he's lifting and he had good gluteal balance to quadricep firing ratios, yeah. I mean, but at the same point, I've been at it long enough. Sometimes too much or too frequently of something will kill, the innate quality that makes him special. So the question in my mind is, if we did lift, even though I was careful and systematic, would it have wiped out his neuromuscular transmission capabilities or dampened them somewhat? we'll never know. He's broke beyond broke and, hanging on. But I've got a young guy at the university right now. It's just almost a photocopy. And, I've sat down and talked to him. Oba's talked to him. And we're not going to repeat history with this guy. He's in the weight room this summer dealing with it. So, we'll see. Very, very similar wiring, frame, setup. So we'll see. But, yeah, in my heart, I think he'd have been better. I mean, this is a kid that ran 9.69 when dated, and yeah, it was when dated, but he had to time this up and withstand those forces and coordinate everything to stay upright. And I asked him about that, and he couldn't jog for 7 days after that run. So stiff and locked and pain and whatnot. And, Cabe and I were talking last night. Safa Powell broke the world record, and people don't study or look at statistics or whatever. What was it, 6 days after he ran again? Yeah. And guess what? Now he's hurt. With Bruni and Donovan, Kareem, all these guys that I've been blessed with under 10 seconds, I mean, after a great run, it's probably 10, 12 days before we were even back to like middle of the road training. And I just think sprinting or jumping or throwing, at supra velocities create tremendous damage. Yes?
Regarding your training, and if you happen to have an athlete who performed out off the charts in training, would you follow the same policy, if you will? As far as post that great exceptional in training performance?
Okay, I'm not following it. Give me a little...
In when you're max speed workouts, you're able to time this athlete.
Yeah, say he ran 6.4 6 times.
Same thing? After that in training, would you give him the same?
We have to back off. If I get a 6.4 day like that, my next day's pretty general and restorative and recuperative. And then the second day is a little bit of something, and the third day we usually kind of get back into things. With that guy, I may wipe those out, go to a plan B or a plan C, and that's what I mean, be prescriptive. Now, in my younger days, when I've blown a lot of people up, I'm not up here and kids, they want to be good and they want to appease you. Like, how do you feel? I'm watching the warm up. I'm like, boy, this doesn't look that good. I'm ready, coach. Because they just ran this great workout. They think more is better, or okay, I did speed. Now I got to go do some speed endurance so I can endure this new quality I just showed up with. And we're in the training room for days. So some of this has come from the School of Hard Knocks. And I think Donovan had a tremendous capacity to heal. Bruni didn't. Like when Bruni got hurt at the 2000 trials, just couldn't heal. I mean, we had the best of the best. We tried everything. Alex knows he got the bills. We went to every degree, and we could not get the muscle was so myopathic we just could not save it. And then they panicked and did some stuff that I won't get into, but just couldn't. And so different people have different recovery restorative abilities, and some of it's tied to your physiotherapy. What is the quality of your therapist? What is the quality of the diet? What is the quality of that athlete's supplement program? Because substrate is a big part of the healing or the recovering process. And if these guys are, again, like Oba, eating at McDonald's and, eating Ben and Jerry's ice cream and stuff like that, his recovery index is a little different than Bruni Surin, who ate, meticulously, who probably spent $1,000 a month on supplements and things like that. Yeah, they're going to recover totally different. Bruni could run that workout on Wednesday and come back Friday and do another block start workout. Oba ran that. It might be 10 days before we even attempt to do something. Good question. All right, in coordination, there's general. We do a lot of agility drills, balance exercise, gymnastics. Multiple throwing, multiple jumping are tremendous coordinative activities. As we said, we get a tuning effect from the multiple throws and the multiple jumps. It was neat. I came to Florida in January this year. I got there January the 12th. On January the 14th, I was coaching 18 guys I'd never seen before in a meet. I was calling the manager on the cell phone, hey, this big tall guy I'm coaching in the triple jump, what's his first name again? So it was a very unique coaching experience, inheriting people at midstream. And I was a little bit concerned how much to load them and what to do, and we're already in the season and all of that. And we were getting so much discoordination in the weight room and whatnot. I was trying to streamline some things. I said, man, it's just for my sanity alone. We're going to hit this multiple throw, multiple jump stuff before we go to the weight room, no matter what. If they fall apart in the weight room, I'm going to give up the weight room, but I need this stuff. And we were all over the map that month of January in the weight room. Some great days, a couple great lifts, bad series. It's just looked like a scattergram. And then 2 weeks of very concentrated multiple jumping, multiple throwing after the track session before the weight room. Boom, everybody started leaning out, lining up. Now, was it cumulative training of the overall system or implementing this? It's hard to say because I didn't have the guts to have a group over here saying, no, you're going to keep going in chaos. And you guys, you get to try the new banana. So I think these things are very restorative, very coordinative in nature. And then there's event-specific, technical work and imitation exercises. Leads me to sprint exercises. What do you guys call them up here? Do you still call them mock drills, or has it changed? A's and B's and sprint exercises, all that. It's my belief these things don't teach you to sprint faster. I mean, how we use them is to analyze motion for therapy, and do we need to change the workout? I think they teach general rhythm and postural demands. I think they warm up connective tissues very, very well. I think they increase spatial and temporal awareness. But do they translate directly into sprinting? No. Don't take this wrong, but wherever I'm at in the world, the Canadians always win the sprint drill component of the pre-meet warm-up or at the practice track. I mean, the Japanese guys are filming these guys like crazy because they're so good. I mean, you got Jason Tonks, he's doing this stuff just perfect. Nicole Forster, she's looking like $1 million, and they're like, wow, these Canadians can do, these drills, great. And then Nicole comes in there and dives and does, her spread eagle thing over the bar. And they're like, wow, but she doesn't jump so good. So there's some translational difficulties. So I encourage people to ergonomically look at, what they're doing and to define and classify these things. Are they general or are they event specific? I think sometimes we think it's event specific when it's really general, and we give certain volumes, intensities, and density factors to these activities, assuming that they're event specific when in fact they're general. And then when we crunch the numbers at the end of the month or the microcycle or whatever, we go back, and if we were really honest, we overdid general coordinative qualities in certain time frames compared to specific. Because the number of contacts, like, in a long, like some of our sprint drill series, we might have 10, 12 different exercises in there. We're doing them 2 times 40 meters. That's a lot of contacts. And you compare that to the number of actual jumps we're taking in a practice, or sprints down the track, or throws in the ring, and pretty soon you got a pretty big imbalance of general coordinative activity and specific coordinative activity. So I like symmetry. I think it's the Germanness in me. I like kind of uniform symmetry, balanced schemes that are integrated and multifaceted. So I point this out that a lot of the young coaches that I mentor get in trouble in the 5 S's in this area, in this coordinative or skill area, in classifying huge blocks of work. I don't know if you remember, did the Paul Check thing come through Canada a little bit? The balance, these Swiss balls, and all of that. And one of my complaints with some of the guys in the States that were using it is, like, at the end of the, these guys were really good. Like, they could do really neat stuff on the balls and weights. And, Dylan could squat on a ball. Yeah, 270 270, Dylan Armstrong, the hammer thrower, on a Swiss ball. Like, he came to Texas and trained for a semester. We'd take him over to the football strength room just to blow these strength coaches' minds. What are you guys doing over in track and field? You know, Dylan would get him their shirt off, just ripped, and get on this Swiss ball. All these guys were just looking at him. And these strength coaches would go home at night and just have nightmares that their program couldn't produce a guy like this. It was really like the Soviet disinformation days. You know, we just wanted to make them think we're over there squatting hours on Swiss balls so that they'd blow up the football team and we'd look better. You got to understand the U.S. system. So my contention was ergonomically, people were spending 2 or 3 hours a day, you know, a few days a week on these, to me, general coordinative activities, and looking at the specific coordinative activities, comparing it to the general, including warm-ups and some of the basic things that we do that are ancillary, you know, things got out of balance pretty quick. Plus, you know, I was talking to one guy, so my guy's going down the track 12 meters per second. He has a pretty unique dynamic balance thing. Yeah, of course, stabilization is important, and balance in a relatively stationary plane is important, but my guy's moving pretty quick, and I'm more interested in what kind of balance he has as he toes off at 12.2 meters per second than in a stationary stance. So I understand the usefulness of it, and we use it, but I think that you have to balance it, you know, in this schematic of, is it general, and where is it lining up to the specificity of coordination load that you're putting on the athlete daily or weekly or monthly or in a phase.